Tier 3. The Allagash Abduction. The Allagash abductions come from a 2-week camping trip that occurred in August 1967. There were 4 men, Jack and Jim Weiner, and there were their friends, Charlie, Foltz, and Chuck Rack, who said they saw strange lights in the sky and later said that they had been abducted by aliens during this trip. Jim Weiner noticed a bright object in the night sky that appeared for about 30 seconds before vanishing. This sighting was unusual, but it didn't alarm the men right away. 2 nights later, on the 20th of August, while the group was still fishing at night, the same object came up again, but this time it was much closer to them. Chuck Rack was the first to look at it, and the group observed its intense light, saying it looked like the sun. They tried to communicate with it, and Charlie Foltz signaled a SOS with a flashlight toward the object. The craft emitted a beam in response, and then began tracking them on the water. The men paddled frantically back to shore as they realized the situation began to escalate. The next memory of this account was them being on the shoreline and the object was gone. They noticed the campfire they had lit just before fishing had burned out, even though they made it so that it would last several hours. This led them to suspect they had experienced a period of missing time. They felt fatigued and went to bed, and didn't see the object for the remainder of their trip. The men initially told their friends and family about the strange light, but they didn't really believe them. For many years, the incident remained strange and an unexplainable memory to them. Later on in 1988, both Jack and Jim both began to experience nightmares over and over again, and it involved the 4 of them sitting naked on a bench, paralyzed. They were troubled by these dreams, and eventually Jim contacted a UFO researcher known as Ray Fowler, who said that the men should undergo a hypnosis treatment to recover their potentially suppressed memories. Now, all 4 of them underwent hypnosis sessions and conducted with the others' knowledge, and tried to recount details of the alien abduction. Now, according to their testimonies, the group was taken aboard a craft where they were separated and put under medical examinations. Jack described the aliens as having terrifying faces and said that they told him not to be afraid and to just comply. Charlie said that the interior of the craft looked like a doctor's office and said that there was a device being placed over his chest which was being used to scrape his skin off. Chuck claimed that he had a clear view of Charlie during the procedures and said there was a silver curved device being used and Charlie was in immense pain. All 4 of the men reported having samples of their skin and bodily fluids taken during this whole situation. When the 4 men were brought together after the hypnosis sessions, they discovered their accounts matched up. There were polygraph tests done on all 4 of them, and they all supported each other's claims. However, there are skeptics, such as Dr. William Cole, who questioned the validity of their memories, saying that the men's accounts may have been influenced by something. But despite the skepticism, the men still stuck to their stories over years. In 2016, Chuck Rack put out doubt on the abduction narrative, saying in an interview that the story of being taken aboard a craft was made up, but he did admit to seeing strange lights during the trip and that the abduction was just for financial gain. However, the other 3 men didn't change their reports and stuck by their experiences, saying it was real. Antonio Villa-Boe case. In 1957, Antonio Villa-Boe is a 23-year-old farmer from Brazil and said that he was abducted by aliens. According to him, the event occurred while he was plowing fields late at night on his farm. He described seeing a bright red light that approached his tractor before revealing itself to be an oval-shaped craft. Later on, he said a group of humanoid beings that are about 5 feet tall came out and made him come onto their ship. He explained them as large heads, small eyes, grayish skin, and wore tight uniforms and helmets. Inside the craft, he was taken to a room that was full of some sort of gas and made him feel sick. He then claimed that a humanoid female entered the room and partook in inappropriate activities with him. He believed that the intent of this was to create some type of human-alien hybrid species, and the offspring would be raised on her planet. Later on, he said he was returned to his tractor with no memory of how he got back. Days following this, he noticed burns on his bodies though. Dr. Olavo Fontes diagnosed them as radiation burns, and according to Villa-Boe, he insisted that he had no explanation on how he got them and stuck by his story. In the late 1950s, his story caught attention because of his rural background. People thought someone from an isolated farming community wouldn't have the knowledge or imagination to invent such a story, but this is a pretty misleading assumption. Villa-Boe comes from a land-owning farm that owned tractors, which were a luxury at the time though. Critics did arise, such as Peter Rogerson, who questioned the legitimacy of this encounter. He pointed out that an article about alien abductions had appeared in O Cruzeiro, which is a widely read Brazilian magazine. Rogerson suggested the farmer might have backdated his experience for credibility. Val Johnson Incident. In 1979, in the rural area of Minnesota, Marshall County Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson encounters something very strange. Although Johnson never claimed to see any aliens or spacecraft, he did describe an encounter with an unexplainable force that left him injured and his patrol car completely damaged. On August 27, 1979, Johnson was patrolling on County Highway 5 near Stephen, Minnesota. Around 2 a.m., he noticed a bright light in the sky. He thought it might have been an airplane in trouble and turned on to State Highway 220. As he approached it, the light suddenly began to move toward his car, filling up the car with a bright light. Johnson said that he heard the glass break and then blacked out. When he woke up 40 minutes later, he was disoriented and in pain. He had a bump on his head and his eyes were burning. However, his car got the worst of it since his windshield was cracked, the hood was dented, the antennas were broken, and both a headlight and hazard light were completely destroyed. Also, both Johnson's wristwatch and the car's clock had lost exactly 14 minutes. The vehicle also appeared to have coasted 850 feet down the road before stopping and sitting at a 90-degree angle towards the highway. Johnson called for help, saying that something attacked his car and it wasn't a vehicle. I don't know what it was. He was taken to a hospital in Warren and doctors treated his eye injuries, which were consistent with exposure to an intense light. The Marshall County Sheriff's Office, who's led by Sheriff Dennis Breck, started an investigation into this incident. They contacted the Air Force and the FAA, both who said that there was no aircraft in the area during the time of his incident. There were more inquiries made to the Center for UFO Studies in Illinois and conducted magnetic tests on the damaged patrol car. Though there weren't any tests that proved definitive answers, there was a Honeywell engineer who examined the car and said that there was likely an electrical force responsible for this damage. Later on, Johnson appeared on Good Morning America and other radio programs to talk about his experience. The Westall UFO. The Westall UFO incident occurred on April 6, 1966 in the suburb of Westall in Melbourne, Australia. Around 11 a.m., there was a group of students at Westall High School who noticed a weird object hovering in the sky. They described it as gray, saucer-shaped, and topped with a dome. It was reported that it let off a low humming noise and was hovering just above the field of the school. As everyone was gathering around, it was reported to move in ways that seemed to defy physics as we understand. Many described the object as performing sudden maneuvers, moving quickly from one point to another, and then just vanishing. Some students even reported saying that it landed for a little while in a paddock before taking off again. There were several witnesses claiming they were approached by men in suits who appeared to be government officials. These individuals were interviewed and told not to discuss about this event publicly. Some also said that they felt intimidated or threatened into silence. In following years of this incident, there were many theories that came up to explain what the witnesses saw. Some say that the object was just an experimental military aircraft, such as the Royal Australian Air Force or the United States Air Force. Given the Cold War context during the 1960s, it's also possible that classified testing of advanced technology was taking place. This is plausible due to the close proximity of Moorabbin Airport, which is a center for general aviation and only 5 kilometers away from the high school. Another possibility is that it was just a weather balloon. Weather balloons are commonly used for atmospheric research, and their appearances are mistaken for UFOs at times. However, many witnesses did insist that the movements and characteristics of the object were inconsistent, didn't match that of a weather balloon's. The Kelly Hopkinsville Encounter. The Kelly Hopkinsville encounter occurred on August 21, 1955, and took place on a small farm in Kelly, Kentucky. There were about a dozen witnesses who claimed it took place on a small farm in Kelly, Kentucky. There were nearly a dozen witnesses and said they encountered small metallic humanoid figures. That evening, Billy Ray Taylor reported seeing a silver glowing object and descend nearby. He described the object as silent with a rainbow exhaust. He was a visitor on the Sutton farm and explained what he had saw, but they laughed it off. However, an hour later, the family's dog started barking, and Taylor, along with Lucky Sutton, went outside to investigate this. They soon saw a glowing figure in the dark. What they saw stood about 3.5 feet tall and had an oversized head with glowing yellow eyes, long arms, and talon-like hands. Its body seemed metallic and was shining. They were both terrified and grabbed a rifle and shotgun to shoot at it. However, the figure flipped backward and then disappeared into the shadows. Not too long after, there was another figure peering through the window. Despite being shot at multiple times, the creatures remained unharmed and continued to approach the house. Miss Langford, who's the family matriarch, described one as resembling a gasoline can with a head on top and small legs. The family later reported hearing scratching noises on the roof and seeing creatures run around the house. After hours of these weird activities, the family fled to the Hopkinsville police station around 11 p.m. The police chief noted their genuine fear, saying, "These aren't the kind of people who normally run to the police for help." The local and state police, along with military force from Fort Campbell, accompanied the family back to the farm but found no signs of the creatures or the reported UFO. But investigators did find shell casings and evidence of gunfire, but nothing to explain the family's claims of aliens. There is one theory that suggests that the creatures they saw were great horned owls, who are known for their behavior and reflective eyes, which might explain their glowing appearance and aggression. Joe Nickel, who is a paranormal investigator, also said that the UFO might have been a meteor since there was a bright fireball reported in the area that night. The Cash Lundrum Incident. On December 29, 1980, Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and Vicky's 7-year-old grandson, Colby, were driving along State Road 1485 near Dayton, Texas. At night, around 9 p.m., they noticed a weird light in the sky. Vicky described the light as bright and out of the ordinary, and Betty said that it seemed to illuminate the sky. As they got closer, the situation escalated, and the three of them started to feel a pretty intense heat. When Betty stopped the car, Vicky braced herself against the dashboard, which left an impression of her hand. Stepping out of the car to get a better view, Betty saw a large diamond-shaped object hovering in the sky and emitting flames from underneath itself. She described this heat as unbearable since it was burning her from the inside out. When she tried to get back to her car, the metal door handle was so hot that she couldn't even touch it. A few moments later, there was a formation of helicopters appearing in the area. Vicky identified them as large milled helicopters and counting at least 22 in total. These helicopters seemed to be pursuing or surrounding the strange object. From that night on, there was a series of health issues that began for all three of them. Around 1 a.m., Colby woke up crying with a fever and vomiting. The next morning, Vicky and Colby were still nauseous and showed signs of severe sunburn. Betty's condition, however, was much worse. Her temperature was spiking really high and had red welts appearing on her skin. In a few days, her health got so bad that she was admitted to a Houston hospital. The doctors diagnosed her with acute radiation poisoning, which requires weeks of hospitalization and left her with significant hair loss and damaged skin. The situation caught the attention of John Schuessler, who was a former NASA project manager and UFO investigator. After interviewing the three of them, he visited the reported site of the encounter. They directed him to a specific stretch on the road where they identified the burn marks and evidence of extreme heat. A few weeks later, the road mysteriously dug up and then repaved. These witnesses reported seeing unmarked trucks hauling away material under very heavy tarps. Schuessler's investigation revealed additional witnesses in the area too. There were at least 10 people reported seeing the same object, and several of them confirmed the presence of helicopters. Officer L.L. Walker was one of them and said he spotted military helicopters flying low with searchlights. He believed their path would intersect the area where Betty and Vicky had their encounter. Betty and Vicky wanted to look for answers, so they approached their senators and got a meeting with the Air Force. At Bergstrom Air Force Base, they noticed a map marking the location of their encounter. The women were questioned for over 2 hours, but the officials denied any military involvement and they should file a claim for damages. But these claims were just dismissed a few weeks later. Betty considered it might have been an experimental military craft, while Vicky expressed doubt about extraterrestrial involvement and believed the government was somehow connected. Years later, all three of the witnesses continued to suffer health problems, but Betty got the worst of it since she developed multiple types of cancer and faced annual hospitalizations. Doctors identified abnormalities in their white blood cell counts and immune systems, which is linked to the exposure of high levels of radiation. One of the physicians that was involved in this case is Dr. Brian McClelland, and he expressed heavy frustration due to the lack of information from the source of radiation. In 1998, Betty Cash passed away after a long battle with health issues that began that night. Tier 4. The Falcon Lake Incident. The Falcon Lake Incident occurred on May 20th, 1967. Stefan Michaluk reported an encounter with some flying object near Falcon Lake, Manitoba, and this left him with serious injuries and lingering health issues. He had ventured into the wilderness near Falcon Lake, about 150 kilometers east of Winnipeg, to look for quartz and silver along the Precambrian Shield. While looking at a vein of quartz, he was startled by a commotion amongst the geese and looked up to see two cigar-shaped objects in the sky, which were glowing red. One of the objects came down onto a flat rock and turned into a disc shape, while the other one just flew away. He believed that the craft might be an experimental US military vehicle, and he sketched it for about 30 minutes before trying to go up to it. As Michalak got closer, he described the craft as metallic, seamless, and emitting a strong sulfuric odor. There was a sound accompanied by hissing noises coming from it. He noticed an opening door with bright lights inside, and he tried to communicate in Polish, Russian, and German with them, but he got no response. When he reached out to touch the craft, his glove melted. The object began to rotate, and a grid-like panel released a blast of air or some type of gas, striking Michalak in the chest and setting his shirt and cap on fire. He was disoriented and nauseous, and stumbled through the forest, but eventually made his way back to his motel before returning to Winnipeg by bus. At the hospital, he was treated for burns on his chest and stomach that later on formed a pattern resembling a grid. He suffered from symptoms such as diarrhea, headaches, weight loss, and reoccurring burn marks. For many weeks, a strong odor of sulfur seemed to come from his body, which was a detail stated by his son, Stan. The incident caught the attention of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and even US authorities. Investigators got samples from the site, such as radioactive metal fragments that were embedded in rock cracks. Soil and vegetation samples were also taken from the area, and they showed unusual levels of radiation. Over the years, authorities and experts looked at the case intensively, but eventually they labeled it as unexplainable. JAL Flight 1628. On November 17, 1986, a Japan Airlines JAL cargo flight crew saw a weird sight during their journey from Iceland to Anchorage, Alaska. Captain Kenju Tarachi, along with his co-pilot and flight engineer, saw UFOs that were later confirmed on radar by the Federal Aviation Administration and the US Air Force. Captain Tarachi, 2 smaller objects and 1 massive one. He explained them as walnut-shaped crafts that were estimated to be about twice the size of an aircraft carrier. The incident began as the flight crew noticed unusual lights moving parallel to their Boeing 747 cargo plane. The lights then approached their aircraft, causing Tarachi to request and receive permission from the FAA to take action. But despite their efforts, they tried descending to 4,000 feet and performing a full 360 turn. The object still remained close and followed their every move for about 400 miles. The enormous craft became visible for a little bit, revealing its distinct shape with bulges above and below a flattened brim. Tarachi referred to the 3 UFOs as the 2 small ships and the mothership. Jokingly, he said that the objects might have been interested in the plane's cargo, which included cases of wine from France. The FAA confirmed that the large object was visible on radar during the incident and said that it came as close as 5 miles to the jet. FAA Flight Control records flight control records from FAA showed that the object was in close proximity to the aircraft for at least 30 minutes. Tarachi later made a detailed drawing of the objects and reported that their movement was pretty erratic, with quick accelerations and sudden stops, which is not typical for any conventional aircraft. There was a report from the FAA that stated that the crew was normal, professional, rational, and had no drug or alcohol involvement. The Gorman Dog Fight. The Gorman Dog Fight happened on October 1st, 1948. This was a 27-minute aerial chase that involved 2nd Lieutenant George F. Gorman and an unidentified bright white orb. At the time, Gorman was a 25-year-old World War II veteran, and he was an experienced fighter pilot flying a P-51 Mustang during a night training session over Fargo, North Dakota. The weather was clear, and the control tower at Hector Airport had no reports of other air traffic in the vicinity aside from a Piper Club, which Gorman could see below him. As Gorman prepared to land around 9 p.m., he saw what appeared to be another aircraft's tail light passing on his right. He was curious and pursued the light, closing the distance to about 1,000 yards. He described the object as a clear, white orb about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, blinking on and off but becoming steady as he approached it. Out of nowhere, the object veered into a sharp left turn, initiating a bunch of crazy aerial maneuvers. At one point, the object headed straight for his plane, forcing Gorman into a steep dive to avoid a collision. The object then started to climb vertically. When Gorman attempted to follow, his aircraft stalled at 14,000 feet, making him unable to maintain this pursuit. Throughout this entire chase, Gorman reported that there was no sound, exhaust, or other signs of propulsion from the object. There are witnesses on the ground that supported Gorman's account. Air traffic controllers at Hector Airport, including Lloyd D. Jensen and H.E. Johnson, observed the object moving at high speeds, noting its distinct and round light. Dr. A.E. Cannon, who was the pilot of the Piper Club with his passenger, also saw the mysterious light in the air control tower after landing. All of them described the object as behaving in ways that normal aircrafts can't do. This incident got attention from the US Air Force working under Project Sign, which is better known as Project Blue Book. It was revealed that there was high levels of radioactivity on Gorman's aircraft and was later linked to the high altitude flying. Investigators quickly concluded that the object was most likely a weather balloon that was released shortly before Gorman's encounter. However, Gorman didn't really believe this. He said that the object demonstrated intelligent control and calculated responses to his actions. He swore to his statement and emphasized the speed, agility, and steep climbing ability of the object, which far exceeded his P-51. Shag Harbor Incident. The Shag Harbor incident occurred on October 4, 1967, when local residents saw a series of strange orange lights in the sky. Witnesses included 5 teenagers describing 4 lights flashing in a sequence before coming down at a sharp 45-degree angle toward the water. Many thought at first they were witnessing an airplane crash, but the lights didn't behave as expected. Instead of sinking, they appeared to float on the water surface about a half-mile away from the shore. The RCMP constable, Ron Pound, was driving toward Shag Harbor on Highway 3 and also saw the lights, but unlike the others, he believed the lights were part of a single craft, estimating it to be about 60 feet long. Him and other officers, including Corporal Victor Werbicki and Constable Ron O'Brien, quickly researched the shoreline. From there, they observed a single yellow light moving slowly across the water and leaving behind a trail of yellowish foam. A few moments later, the light disappeared, by either submerging or just moving out of sight. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police reported the incident to the Rescue Coordination Centre in Halifax and NORAD Radar in Nova Scotia. Both agencies confirmed no missing aircraft, civilian or military, that had been reported that night. The following day, Canadian Forces headquarters in Ottawa received an official report saying that an unidentified object had entered the waters of Shag Harbor. The military investigation escalated, with the HMCS Granby dispatching to the site. Navy divers spent days going through the ocean floor, but there was no debris or wreckage. A few decades later, in 1993, the case was brought up again because of Chris Stiles, a MUFON investigator. He started to track down original witnesses to go through their accounts and look for any leads. With the assistance of a fellow investigator, Doug Ledger, he learned that the Shag Harbor incident extended beyond just the initial crash. According to the interviews with divers and other sources, the object that submerged in Shag Harbor didn't disappear. It moved underwater to Government Point, which is a location near a submarine detection base about 25 miles away. Naval sonar detected the craft's presence, and military vessels quickly surrounded the area. Now, there was a second unidentified craft that reportedly arrived, which was believed to be assisting the first one. The Navy monitored the situation closely for many days, considering itself for several days. The standoff ended eventually when naval forces were called away to investigate a Russian submarine incursion. The 2 underwater crafts moved quickly away toward the Gulf of Maine. Breaking the surface, they accelerated into the sky and disappeared, leaving no evidence behind. Mantel UFO Incident. On January 7, 1948, 25-year-old Kentucky Air National Guard pilot Captain Thomas Mantel died while pursuing an unidentified flying object, and it was described by witnesses as a massive and strange phenomenon. That afternoon, Mantel and 3 other pilots from Flight C 165th Fighter Squadron were returning from a low-altitude training session. As they neared Fort Knox, Kentucky, Godman Army Airfield's commanding officer, Colonel Guy Hicks, requested for assistance in investigating reports of a mysterious object in the sky. There were many witnesses in the region, such as military personnel at Godman Tower, that described the object as white, round on the top, and cone-shaped underneath. Mantel and the 2 other pilots ascended to 15,000 feet in their F-51D Mustangs. A 4th pilot, Lieutenant Hendricks, continued to Standy Ford Field. Around 2:45 p.m., Mantel reported sighting the object at 14,000 feet, describing it as directly ahead and above him. He later said that it appeared metallic and immense in size, reflecting the sunlight. The other pilots turned back at 22,000 feet due to the oxygen limitations, leaving him alone in his pursuit. As Mantel climbed higher, his radio transmissions started to malfunction. His last clear message said that he ascended to 25,000 feet for a better look. Around 3:50 p.m., Godman Tower lost sight of both the object and Mantel's aircraft. A few minutes later, there were sightings of the UFO from communities south of Fort Knox. By 5 p.m., there was debris from Mantel's crashed plane discovered in Shelby County. Investigators found his seatbelt shredded and his watch stopped at 3:18 p.m. At first, there was speculation by the Air Force saying that Mantel had mistaken the planet Venus for a UFO, which is a similar misidentification that occurred a few months earlier. However, astronomers stated that Venus was not visible in the sky at the time. The weather conditions that day were clear, with excellent visibility. Over time, the Navy's classified Skyhook balloon program came up as a potential explanation. These high-altitude balloons are used for intelligence gathering and could expand to massive sizes as they ascend to 60,000 feet, which matched the general description of the object Mantel pursued. But there was no evidence that confirmed that a Skyhook balloon was in the area that day. Also, there are unverified accounts suggesting Mantel's final transmissions mention seeing occupants inside the object and that his plane caught fire before crashing. Thank you guys for watching, and if you like this, let me know down in the comments.